You are listening to Perplexity.
County 911, what is the emergency? Two people in the back of my store. One person seems dead and the other person is breathing. The door was open this morning. I think one of my managers came in to open it. Someone tied her up. I need an ambulance right away.
There were lots of people around at the time that a terrible crime happened inside the Lululemon store on Bethesda Avenue Friday night. A timeline released by police indicates employees closed the store at 9 p.m., then set the alarm and locked the door at 9:45. At 10:05 p.m., two female employees returned to pick up a forgotten item. That's when two men wearing ski masks and gloves entered behind them. Another employee found the victims when she arrived to open the store at 8 a.m. Saturday. Police think it was a crime of opportunity, a robbery that turned into rape and murder. 30-year-old Jayna Murray is described as a valiant fighter who would not have hesitated to protect herself and her 27-year-old co-worker who was beaten but survived. The crime scene may hold the best leads police have at this point.
We are still in the process of collecting physical evidence and doing forensic analysis. My hope is that in the next few days we may get additional leads as a result of that forensic analysis.
The attack in the heart of downtown Bethesda has residents and the business community on edge.
This episode will contain disturbing content. Listener discretion is advised. On Friday, March 11th, 2011, in downtown Bethesda, Maryland, Jayna Murray was closing up the sales floor of Apple for the night. The Apple employees had been working a very long shift because they were getting ready for the iPad 2 to drop just the next morning. But Jayna couldn't help but notice some very strange and concerning noises coming from the store next to them, Lululemon Athletica. These concerning noises included things like high-pitched screaming, grunting, and thud noises. So she would alert two security guards who would confirm the screaming and clear signs of a struggle. They would report hearing two distinct female voices, with one saying, "Talk to me, don't do this, what's going on, God help me, please help me." But despite these clear signs of a struggle and this woman shouting for help, the cops were not called, and the security guards chalked the noise up to female drama. So on the following morning, Saturday, March 12th, there would be a horrifying discovery. The Lululemon Athletica appeared to have been ransacked, and in the back would be the brutally beaten body of 30-year-old Lululemon employee Jayna Murray. There would also be a survivor, 28-year-old Lululemon employee Brittany Norwood. Brittany would tell police after closing, two masked men came into the store and savagely beat, assaulted, and murdered Jayna. They also brutally assaulted Brittany, beat and bound her, and left her there to die. A senseless attack in an affluent and safe neighborhood, and two monsters were still, allegedly, on the loose. It would be a media circus. Brittany and Jayna's families would be left to deal with the trauma and the unimaginable grief. But as investigators began to look into the details of the crime, they would make a startling conclusion. Everything was not as it seemed. This is the story of the Lululemon murder. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I am your host, Kadra. If you are new to the show, welcome. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you are in the right place. Though today's episode is much more of a serious tone and an important but very disturbing story to share. And if you are a returning listener, hello, my friends. Welcome back. I'm very happy you're here. Like I just said, I have a very heavy but important story today. This will be a true crime case. And this is also a fairly recent story. This was in 2011. So first of all, I want to thank Abby for requesting this story. But with recent true crime cases, I tend to not cover them. I'm really covering this for two reasons. One, I found this story very compelling and disturbing. Something important, like some important messages here that I think we should talk about. And two, this was requested by a listener. So thank you, Abby, for requesting this. And I am not going to do any announcements today. I think we should just get right into the story, especially with the sensitivity of this story. So like I said at the beginning, trigger warning. All the sources that were used for today's episode will be down in the show notes. I did read a book for this case. I would highly recommend it. It is by Dan Morse. So that will be down in the show notes, and I will put a picture of that book in the YouTube video for people who are interested. So, without further ado, let's get into the story of the murder of Jayna Murray, also known as the Lululemon Murder. So to first understand this murder, it's important to talk a little bit about the town of Bethesda, Maryland. This is where Lululemon was located, and this shopping center was known as Bethesda Row. It's still around today. This was considered kind of a hoity-toity spot, and it was very small, just about 5 blocks, so everybody who worked here was used to seeing each other. And here you can find upscale restaurants, bars, expensive furniture stores. Bethesda also draws in patrons because they stay open late, and at least at this time, they gave their visitors a strong sense of safety. But all of this would change after the murder of Jayna Murray. This area also ranks as the most educated place in the nation. It's part of Montgomery County with a population of 1 million people, and just about 20 murders happen here per year, which is far fewer than Washington, D.C., close by. And as for Bethesda, crimes simply didn't happen here, especially to this degree. The murder of Jayna Murray and the savage attack of Brittany Norwood would leave patrons of Bethesda Row uneasy. CCTV footage also was not very popular back then, so no cameras were actually inside the store at the time of the attack, which surprised me with this being 2011. There were, however, some cameras in the street area and at the Apple store, so police would use this to piece some things together. Shortly after Jayna's murder, an upscale boutique close by installed panic buttons. Stores were closing earlier, and workers were walking to their cars in groups, sending each other text updates to report their safety. There was also a store close by called Ranger Surplus, and they had a huge upsale with their pepper spray. They sold 3 times as much as they normally did following the days of Jayna's murder. Business at nearby restaurants also dropped upwards of 50%. So the people of Bethesda were clearly shaken, and they were wondering who was next, because these 2 violent men were on the loose. And because the security guards next door had not responded to the struggle on March 11th or alerted police, Jayna and Brittany would not be found until the next morning. So 26-year-old Ryan Haw walked up to the Apple store in Bethesda at 7:45 a.m. He was anxiously awaiting the release of the new iPad. Shortly thereafter, he noticed a woman had just entered the Apple store, clearly in a panic. She would later be identified as Rachel O'Ertley, the manager of Bethesda Row, Lululemon. And Rachel would explain to Apple employees that she had just gone inside to open the store for the morning when she noticed clear signs of a struggle and a break-in. She could also hear moaning coming from the back of the store. So she was too scared to go in alone. And Ryan, having a prior military background and being a good Samaritan, agreed to accompany her into the store so they could figure out what was going on. So Ryan goes in, he's calling out, "Hello, is anybody there?" But there would be no response. In fact, he would recall that the store was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Meanwhile, Ryan's taking in the visual details of this horrifying scene, and he would note scattered bloodstains on the floor, items strewn everywhere, merchandise setups turned over, and towards the back of the store, Ryan would notice a purple door that had a large amount of blood pooling from underneath it. So when Ryan would push open this door, he was met with some resistance. And this was because lying on the ground was the body of the store employee, 30-year-old Jayna Murray. She was found lying face down, not moving, and Ryan could clearly see that she had passed away. So he then went towards the front of the store, and he noticed in the bathrooms there was a pair of human legs sticking out. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is another woman." So he goes to her. She's bound with plastic zip ties. Her hands were bound over her head, and her ankles were bound as well. Her face was bloody, and this was where the moaning had been coming from earlier. This survivor would later be identified as the other store employee that had been working that night, 28-year-old Brittany Norwood. Store manager Rachel would then rush outside and call 911. Police would quickly arrive, guns drawn, and they couldn't be sure whoever was responsible was maybe still hiding in there somewhere. But there would be no shots, no screams. The suspects, at least what they thought at the time, were long gone. Paramedics would transfer Brittany to the nearby suburban hospital, and homicide detective Jim Drury would arrive on scene at 9:25 a.m. So Drury would examine the body of 30-year-old Jayna Murray and the surrounding scene. Jayna's black yoga pants had been torn open at the crotch, indicative of sexual assault. A rope was twisted around her neck. A white rock about the size of a baseball was found close to her head, covered in blood. A wide open gash was found on the back of her head, about 4 inches across, and deep, to the point where it was clear that this was the product of repeated blows. Resting on Jayna's left hand was a Buddha statue, similar to one that had been seen in the bathroom of the store. And there's all these different weapons around. Police see a rope, a claw hammer, a wrench, 3 different box cutters, along with various supplies like a paintbrush, a roll of duct tape, almost like a toolbox had been dumped over on the ground. There was also a merchandise peg, which was part of the store's display, found next to Jayna's body, covered in blood. Police suspected this was the primary murder weapon that was likely used to crush Jayna's skull. Jayna had suffered deep gashes and gouges, too many to count. She was beaten so severely that her face was purple. She looked unrecognizable. When her body would be examined later, the forensic pathologist would first assume Jayna had been hit by a car. This is how horrifically beaten this woman was. She had dozens of defensive wounds. Her skull had numerous wounds as well, all varying in shape and size. Some were circular, others were small, as the tip of a ballpoint pen. Others were straight, turning at various angles. A variety of weapons had clearly been used on Jayna. She had suffered 13 separate skull fractures, including a subarachnoid hemorrhage. There were hundreds of wounds to her face and body, and these were just the wounds they could easily count. They couldn't account for any wounds that were overlapping with each other. And blood was also found in the wound paths, which is indicative that Jayna was alive for the vast majority of this. Now, alive and conscious are, of course, 2 different things, but nonetheless, This was a savage attack. And that's really the only reason that I go into such detail with this, because this is very upsetting. This is very triggering. It's horrific. I don't like going into detail about these things. There's a lot of things I also left out about this, but I just want to paint the picture that this was a very, very senseless attack. The other thing that I immediately noticed is the amount of weapons used and the amount of times that she was hit or stabbed, hundreds of times, for these two masked men to be random strangers. That's highly unlikely, right? Like, people who follow true crime, my first sense was this is clearly a crime of passion. Jayna's bag was also found inside of the store with her ID, snacks, a digital camera, bottle of wine, and a book. But her car keys were missing, and there was no cash in her bag either. So later that day, police would announce a 6-figure reward, hoping to lead them to these two masked monsters who had escaped. Rachel, Lululemon manager, would tell police that night, Jayna, who was a supervisor, and Brittany, who was a saleswoman, had been working the closing shift, just the two of them. Lululemon closed at 9 p.m., and Jayna had actually called Rachel shortly before 10 p.m. from her car. They had discussed typical procedures for the store, how the shift went. They talked about bag checks, where workers check each other's bags and purses on their way out from the store to make sure no one is stealing. This is very common in retail. But Jayna had something interesting to share with Rachel. She would say that she found a pair of crops or leggings in Brittany's bag with the tags still on. So she had suspected Brittany of stealing. Brittany had accidentally left her wallet behind when they had closed and called Jayna to let her back into the store. What happened after that was unclear at the time. They needed to get Brittany's side of the story. So meanwhile, Brittany is being treated for injuries at the hospital, and police officer Colin O'Brien had gone to interview her. Brittany Norwood's pants had been ripped in a similar fashion to Jayna's, and blood-stained glass was also found on her back. Defensive wounds were on her right hand. Numerous lacerations were also on her chest, stomach, back, and legs. She had a deep gash across her forehead that would require stitches. She also required some stitches to her hand, and the cuts on Brittany's chest, stomach, back, and legs were all straight. And they were at the same depth, which would indicate that Brittany had been in the same position each time when they were inflicted. So Brittany would ask police how her friend was doing. And police knew the state of Jayna, but they just told Brittany that they hadn't been to the scene yet, they didn't know. So Brittany would go on to tell Detective O'Brien her side of the story. She would tell the same story that Rachel had told Detective Drury. At 9:45 p.m., Brittany and Jayna had left the store in opposite directions. Brittany realized she had left her wallet behind, and she called Jayna to be let back in. Jayna told Brittany she had also forgotten her laptop, so that's fine, I don't mind going back with you to get what we need, and then we can go. When they returned to the store, they deactivated the alarm, and they didn't think to lock the door behind them because they were only going to be there for a few minutes. This is when they were quickly met by two masked men wearing dark clothing. Brittany was unsure of their race because their faces were covered, but when pressed by police, she would claim both men sounded young and Caucasian. Each wore ski masks and gloves. She said one man was tall, about 6 feet, and the other one was much shorter, about 5'3". The shorter man would attack Brittany and demand that she opens the 3 small safes in front of the store, while the tall one attacked Jayna. Brittany was then tied up and raped. He also violated her with a clothes hanger. Police would later determine the alarm was set at 9:45 p.m. and deactivated at 10:05 p.m. A patrolman would also find Jayna's car, a silver Pontiac, parked about 3 blocks away, which seemed strange to investigators, because if she had driven back around 10 p.m., she should have been able to park closer. There's nobody around. A patrolman would also later tell police he had seen Jayna's car parked in the lot at 12:30 a.m. that morning with someone sitting behind the wheel. So this was long after Jayna's murdered. But he couldn't make out who it was. The car remained in the parking lot for several hours. Someone had moved the car from where it was originally parked. Bloody shoe tracks were on the scene as well, and these appeared to come from a pair of size 14 athletic shoes that also mysteriously stopped at the doorway and the back exit of the store. There was also no blood on the pavement outside. There was a box of plastic zip ties as well found inside the store, the same kind that had been used to tie up Brittany. So it's like these men didn't even come with what they needed. They used weapons at the store. They used zip ties at the store. Were they expecting these women to be gone? It just didn't make any sense. Several things about the scene were just baffling to police, and they were beginning to wonder if, as messed up and insane as this could be, was there a possibility that Brittany Norwood was involved? Could she have known these two masked men? So let's talk a little bit about Jayna and Brittany, get to know them. Jayna Murray was a resident of Arlington, Texas, which is like 30 minutes from where I grew up. Her mother was a flight attendant, and Jayna seems like she was incredibly well-rounded, very ambitious, fun, and just a genuine person. Jayna's father ran an oil drilling project around the world, and he had a military background as well. She also had two brothers that she was very close with, and they advocated for her. They stood up for her. Jayna had a long-distance serious boyfriend who lived in Seattle, and he was getting his PhD in educational statistics at the time. So growing up, Jayna tagged along with her brothers to Boy Scout camps led by her dad. She danced, and as she got older, she went on all kinds of incredible adventures around the world. She went bungee jumping, scuba diving, skydiving, things that I would never be brave enough to do. But she loved doing them, and she did them with a smile. She also enjoyed drinking margaritas, but her all-time favorite drink was Diet Dr. Pepper. An excellent choice, if I do say so myself. She was incredibly intelligent, she was fluent in Spanish, and she was nearly finished with 2 master's degrees. At the time of her murder, she was just 2 months away from getting degrees in business administration and communication. And to top it all off, she was doing her studies at Johns Hopkins, a very well-distinguished university. So this was a very impressive young woman. It was not hard for Jayna to make friends. She was adored by many, and she also had a funny side. She knew how to throw her voice, which she had done in the past to prank people. She was living and breathing marketing and branding, and a few years before her murder, Jayna had learned about Lululemon Athletica through a friend. And Lululemon really intrigued Jayna because the company had this very strong branding and marketing technique. So this would draw her to getting a job with the company, and she would work at the Bethesda store, where she would eventually meet Brittany Norwood. Brittany grew up in Washington State in a very large African-American family. She has 8 brothers and sisters, and her family at the time was making a modest living, with her dad running an upholstery shop. The Norwood children were raised to be very driven and successful. One of Brittany's sisters would later become a doctor, and 3 of her brothers were engineers. Brittany was, according to her family and friends, very bubbly and caring, quick-witted, just full of energy. She was also a very talented athlete. She was a former college soccer star. She loved going to all different kinds of exercise classes, and she had aspirations to open a gym someday. So similar to Jayna, like just very ambitious, had a lot going on. At the time of the murder, Brittany was hoping to secure a job as a personal trainer, and she actually had an interview coming up in just a few days. But Brittany's childhood had some challenges. Her family did have to go through 2 personal bankruptcy proceedings, and at one point, they listed over $90,000 in debt from paying for prep school and university tuition, along with medical bills. They had a lot of children, but These hardships never seemed to affect how the Norwood children were taken care of. According to one of the Norwood's neighbors, the children were always dressed well, on time for school. They seemed to have a good childhood. Brittany also didn't really involve herself in drama. She was very easy to let things go. But as Brittany grew older, several people began to notice something wasn't quite right. When Brittany would babysit for a family once, it became apparent that the husband's bowl of change that he kept on his nightstand kept getting less and less coins in it. They seemed to be disappearing out of thin air. And the family's walk-in closet, where the wife kept precious jewelry, was missing several precious items. But the family was very close with the Norwoods, so they decided to not confront Brittany, and instead of accusing her of stealing, they just stopped asking her to babysit altogether. Brittany later studied sociology in her college years, but she ended up on academic probation, putting her scholarship for soccer in danger. But she did manage, at least for a little while, to turn her grades around, and she was doing really well on the soccer field. She was very competitive, with her coach later saying she hated losing more than she liked winning. Brittany's teammates also enjoyed spending time with her because she was a very fun person, and she brought everybody snacks, or she'd give you a blanket if you were cold. But her friends were also noticing some of their belongings going missing, and it was only happening when Brittany was around. So eventually, these friends and teammates confronted Brittany, and she immediately fessed up to everything. She showed a lot of remorse, and she said she wouldn't ever do it again. But the stealing would continue. So eventually, these complaints from the teammates make their way up to the coach, and the coach would remove Brittany from the team. So Brittany's longtime dream of playing for a U.S. national team was now never gonna happen. And the other really big thing about this too is that she was in college on a soccer scholarship. So when this happened, she lost her scholarship and she couldn't afford college. So by the fall of 2004, she was out of school, 11 credits shy of graduating. She would later tell people she had graduated from Stony Brook, but this was not true. In 2006, Brittany also went through a breakup. Her boyfriend quickly got a new girlfriend, and Brittany proceeded to stalk her ex to the point where he and his new girlfriend actually had to file a restraining order. Brittany would call incessantly, and several items in her ex's home had also gone missing. His new girlfriend would also tell the courts she felt that she was in immediate danger. Brittany would claim her ex had cheated on her with this new woman, and they had gotten in this big fight. She found out about the woman by following him home one day. Brittany also allegedly would violate the restraining order later, continuing to show up near the ex's home and work. But Brittany managed to make these claims go away quietly. She didn't bother to show up for the hearing, and when the judge issued a bench warrant, it went nowhere. In April of 2008, Brittany's apartment building filed a claim to evict her because she was 2 months behind on rent, prompting her to move in with her sister. But by then, Brittany had developed a taste for the high life. Despite being behind on all of these bills, she wore designer clothing. She enjoyed fancy drinks, and she always took a lot of pride in her hair and her nails looking perfect. She would spend hundreds of dollars on these things pretty much weekly. I actually came across a story of her getting, it was either her hair or her nails done, but it was really interesting and messed up because when she went to pay, she made this massive scene about how she couldn't pay because her wallet was missing. Someone had stolen her wallet. But when employees would later look at their CCTV footage, they would find no one ever came near Brittany's purse. So this was another lie. Brittany continued to be accused by other people of stealing, including her own family members. One sister actually accused Brittany of stealing several $100s cash right from her purse. So Brittany, at this point, has this clear pattern of stealing, lying, taking advantage of people, And now she has this somewhat violent and very concerning history of stalking. So despite Brittany's bubbly demeanor, she would have these periods as well where she would struggle with mental health. She would fall into social isolation. She would have difficulty concentrating, trouble sleeping. She also had a history of a couple of mild concussions from her time playing soccer. So she eventually ends up at the Lululemon Georgetown store for employment after she said she graduated from Stony Brook with a 3.4 GPA. Meanwhile, she hadn't finished school and her GPA was a 1.98. So she got the job, but mysteriously, employees start noticing they're having these things go missing. They're losing cash, they're losing belongings. And eventually the manager grew suspicious, realizing cash was only going missing during shifts Brittany worked. There was also an event one night in 2010 where company employees were allowed to purchase apparel from Lululemon for 70% off. The purchase limit was $1,000, which is pretty generous. But Brittany would ask the manager if she could go over the limit, and the manager agreed, thinking it would just be a little bit over. But Brittany racked up $2,200. And so the manager is like, you more than doubled the limit, and they're not happy about this. They feel taken advantage of. So Brittany ended up being pulled into a meeting and she was fired on the spot. But Brittany ended up complaining to her regional manager about this because she basically found out other people had also gone over the limit and they didn't face any type of repercussions. Not that they went anywhere near over the limit that Brittany did. But basically, to make a long story short, because there was no way at the time to prove that Brittany had been stealing, corporate had no other choice but to side with Brittany, and they transferred her to another store, which would be the Bethesda store. This was under the management of Rachel Oertley. And there she would soon meet Jayna Murray. So at the time that Brittany was at Lululemon Bethesda, she was exercising with personal trainers, lifting weights, taking all these exercise classes, boxing, practicing yoga. She was in peak physical shape. She was studying anatomy and physiology and kinesiology as well. She was working towards her personal trainer exam. So if everything went well, she was going to be a certified trainer by March. She was also living with a roommate named Lisa. Lisa had some interesting things happen to her as well. She discovered a few months into living with Brittany that despite taking Lisa's money every month, Brittany hadn't been paying for their utilities. They were all under Brittany's name. Lisa was also noticing personal belongings going missing. Meanwhile, debt collectors were hounding Brittany, and her bank was hounding her as well. She had all these unpaid bills. So Brittany starts looking into getting sugar daddies on Craigslist, and she was eventually juggling at least 5 men. So it seems like Brittany's lifestyle depended entirely upon lies and taking advantage of other people. So the lead up to the murder. Bethesda store employees were piecing together 3 separate reported theft incidents. There was an expensive bottle of Vera Wang perfume that had gone missing from an employee's purse, and 2 other employees had also reported cash being taken out of their wallets. And Brittany had worked all 3 of these shifts, so she's not exactly being slick. And the real kicker of all of this was an employee had noticed a bottle of Vera Wang perfume shortly after the theft in Brittany's bag. This all just seemed like too much of a coincidence. But, similar to the incidents at Georgetown, there wasn't any definitive proof. In order to fire her, they would have to catch her in the act, and there were also no cameras. So employees knew that they had to kind of piece this together if they were going to get rid of Brittany. Among the employees that had been made aware of this suspected theft was Jayna Murray. So at around 9:30 p.m. on the night of Friday, March 11th, 2011, Brittany and Jayna had finished up their closing duties. They were ready to leave for the night, as we discussed earlier, and there was just one thing left to do, their final bag checks, which I said was, common in retail. But when Jayna looked through Brittany's bag, she pretty much immediately finds this pair of crops, which is a workout pant. And the tags are still on, so she asks Brittany, hey, where's your receipt? I don't see a receipt in here. And Brittany's like, Oh, I threw it away. This was actually something employees often did because they couldn't return items with their discount anyway. So Brittany's like, okay, well, who rang you up? And Brittany names this other employee that was working earlier that day. So because she doesn't have the receipt, Jayna's like, okay, well, let's go look at the computer. But they've already closed up for the night. The computers are shut down. It's going to take a long time to reboot them. At this point, like, okay, whatever. We'll figure it out tomorrow. So Jayna sets the burglar alarm at 9:45 and the two walk out. Brittany walked towards the subway and Jayna walked in the opposite direction towards her Pontiac. While Jayna headed to her car, she called Keoma, who was the employee that Brittany claimed rang her up. But Keoma confirmed what Jayna had been suspecting. She didn't ring Brittany up for anything. So Brittany was busted. They had finally caught her. So then Jayna calls the manager, Rachel, who had planned to fire Brittany the next morning. A few minutes later, Brittany would call saying she forgot her wallet. Jayna had also forgotten her laptop, so she agreed to go back and let Brittany in. 10 minutes later, Jayna pulled her car near the front of the store. Remember, it was moved, but at this point, it's at the front of the store, parking illegally in a fire lane. It was 10:05 p.m. and the two of them would walk inside. And in the first few days of the investigation, what happened next was unclear. But soon, it would all be revealed. Upon inspection of Jayna's car, traces of blood were found on the driver's floor mat and on the door. A jacket and a hat were also found inside the car, and they had a small amount of human blood. Police thought they were searching for two masked monsters. After all, parking lot surveillance actually showed two men walking around the outside of the rear of the yoga store on the night of the murder. But eventually, detectives were able to track down these two men. Turns out they were kitchen workers. They worked just a couple doors down, and they had been walking away from the restaurant after their shifts ended. So they were walking away, not towards the store. And after further review of the footage, it was clear to police that the men hadn't been involved. Additionally, these men would have regularly ridden the same public transit that Brittany Norwood did. So she would have known their routine. By March 14th, police were seriously raising their eyebrows at Brittany and her story. So they bring Brittany down to the station to go over her story again. She told the same story, but this time she sprinkles in a couple more details. She would, through tears, recount how cold and evil the masked killers were, how one pushed Brittany on top of Jayna's body. She also claimed the killers knew where she lived and that she was very terrified. She said she hadn't been sleeping. Her family wanted her to move back to Seattle. She claimed the killers must have looked in her purse and found out where she lived through her license. But to Detective Drury, something felt off about Brittany's countenance and her whole story. The tears, they felt like crocodile tears. And this whole story of these two masked men, it was just so evil. She said that one masked man called her the N-word as he raped her. And the other detective, Detective Reuven, thought about the shoes that had been found that made the bloody footprints. These size 14 Reeboks had been found in the store, and these matched the bloody tracks found throughout the store. So Reuven is like, I need to know what is going on with these shoes. So he asks Brittany about them, and she would basically explain they kept a pair of men's shoes and women's shoes in the store at all times for alterations. They would use these shoes to help adequately fit the pants. But why would the killer put these shoes on? Even Brittany's own brother, Chris, was having doubts, telling detectives he was of course relieved and very thankful his sister was alive. But he didn't understand why these killers didn't harm Brittany. It didn't make sense. He also said Brittany was very secretive. So at this point, police were convinced of one of two things. Brittany knew the killers and was in on the crime, or Brittany did the entire thing herself. It was the shoes that tipped off detectives. Why would the killer have put them on? Why would he then clean the shoes up and put them back? The shoe prints never left the store. Brittany's New Balance shoes also showed tracks throughout the store, and they seemed to cross paths with the Reeboks. And as far as detectives could tell, Brittany's New Balance tracks were always made first. But if this was the case, this would mean it was Brittany who had inflicted hundreds of blows with whatever tools she could find. It was Brittany who had staged 2 rapes, including her own. It would mean she took the Windex Formula 409 and cleaned those shoes. It would mean Brittany cut herself multiple times, hit herself over the head, tied herself up, and laid in that store all night next to the woman she had just gruesomely murdered. Brittany's report from the nurse at the hospital regarding rape injuries also found no tearing or tenderness. Meanwhile, in the media, this case had sparked global outrage amongst women. 2 white men had brutally raped and murdered a woman and raped another, a young black woman, tortured her, left her tied up all night. The police knew they had to be absolutely sure before they came down on Brittany, or they would face major repercussions. So on Wednesday, March 16th, Brittany, her dad, and several of her siblings returned to the police station once again. Police would tell Brittany they were doing this because they needed her fingerprints and her hair samples for quote-unquote elimination purposes. Brittany sat with her legs crossed for hours, calmly answering questions. But when it came time to take her fingerprints, the procedure stretched past 30 minutes. She failed to lay down clear fingerprints and continued to apologize with the fingerprint technicians. Meanwhile, Brittany's brother would tell detectives that Brittany had withheld important information. Turns out, according to Brittany, the men had made her move Jayna's car on the night of the murder. How did she forget this incredibly important piece of information? Brittany told detectives that the men had made her move the car, and they had also made her put Jayna's hat on, the one that was found inside the car with blood on it. Jayna's blood had also been found on Brittany, and she explained this by claiming that the men cruelly pushed Brittany on top of Jayna.
Explain to you guys how that night played out.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to him sexually assaulting me and zip tying me, they made me move her car.
Okay.
I know where her car is. And they seemed to know where it was, where she was parked.
Okay.
They asked, they said, where are her keys? I have no idea. One of them punched me in my head and made me look through her coat and her bag for them. When I finally found them, they said if I was to pass to anyone and open my mouth, I can consider myself dead. And that one of them would be watching the entire time. And I honestly don't remember the exact lot, but they said to cross, it's almost like on the other side of Wisconsin or something.
Okay.
From that street. I remember seeing a cop and I was just too scared to even flag him down, do anything.
Was that like when you left the store or when you were parked?
When I left the store.
So when you first left the store, okay.
And he was driving past in his car? And how did you fall onto Jayna? I mean, were you on your hands and your knees or straight down, face down?
On my knees.
Okay. Were you straddling her or were you actually physically like pancaked on top of her or what?
They pushed me on her and he touched her head.
You touched her head? With what?
And I slid to the ground.
Okay, so your hands got no blood on either side of her?
Yes.
Okay. I know it's hard.
And blood all over.
You had blood all over you? And then what? And what, did he say anything to you when he pushed you down?
It's my fault.
Okay.
Police had had enough. Detective Drury would say, quote, "Brittany, we've given you every opportunity in the world to tell us what happened, how this thing started. It is entirely up to you at this point as far as how people are going to see you. Are they going to see you as a cold-blooded, heartless, goddamned killer? Or are they going to see you as a person that got into a situation over her head? That is entirely up to you if you're going to tell us what happened." End quote. Drury explained he would have to tell Jayna's parents what happened as well. Quote, "The only person that can tell us why their daughter is dead is you. Is it because Brittany is a psycho, cold-blooded killer?" End quote. And Brittany would begin sobbing and crying out, "No, I'm not a psycho. I'm not cold-blooded." But Drury keeps pushing. "What are you? What happened? Who started the fight? Let's get it out. Either you started it or Jayna started it, because they're going to have to be told of the amount of injuries that Jayna had. Multiple injuries. And somebody's going to have to explain how she got those injuries. I'm trying to be nice to you, kid. Told your brother and your sister that I would do everything that I could to help you. But you gotta help yourself. So who started it?" End quote. Brittany, in a very quiet and high-pitched voice, would then look at the floor and say, "I didn't start it." She would claim Jayna started the altercation. But then she would say she couldn't talk anymore.
Brittany, comes a point sometimes when we have to break down and get everything off of our chests. You gotta tell us what really happened.
I'm telling you.
Okay, because I know what really happened.
I told you what really happened.
No, what you've done is you've concocted an incredible story that doesn't make any doggone sense.
No.
With the injuries that you have, they're self-inflicted. Yeah, they're self-inflicted. You did this to yourself. It's incredible that you want me or anyone to believe that you're lying like this overnight, haven't moved, okay? That's posed. Nobody in the world is going to believe this story. No one. He doesn't believe it. My boss doesn't believe it. When I tell your brother and your sister, they ain't gonna believe it. And your mother and your father, they're gonna say, bullshit.
On Friday, March 18th, Brittany Norwood would be arrested for the murder of Jayna Murray. Brittany had very little to say about that night, just that it wasn't her fault. So regarding legal proceedings, Brittany's defense would consider several defenses. They would say, well, she suffered 2 concussions while playing soccer. And they were like, maybe we can go for the insanity plea. They even sought the help of Dr. David Williamson, one of the world's leading experts on brain trauma and behavioral changes. But the problem with an insanity plea was that she had tried to cover up the murder, and she had no history of ever undergoing any type of mental health treatment. So then they're like, okay, that plan's out the window. Maybe we can go for a 2nd-degree murder plea, make her sentence lighter. And Brittany would plead guilty to this, which meant her sentence could be capped, making her eligible for parole in as soon as 15 years, which is just insane to me. Meanwhile, Jayna Murray's family, additional victims in all of this, would continue to go through hell. Phyllis, Jayna's mother, couldn't take walks anymore. She would struggle at the grocery store, purposefully avoiding the drink aisle, where she would often buy powdered drink mixes for Jayna. Every day, Phyllis would dread the hour between 3 and 4 p.m. because that's when Jayna would always call. David, Jayna's father, was plagued with bad dreams of his daughter's final minutes. He also grew to hate being alone because his thoughts of his lost daughter would consume him. So he would work these really long shifts. He would spend hours at the gym, and then he would go straight to sleep, hoping he wouldn't be up all night. Hugh, Jayna's brother, who had flown to Washington from Iraq after the murder, would find a package awaiting him that had been sent by Jayna before before she was killed. He would find a running cap along with a card that read, "Chips without dip, macaroni without cheese, me without you. It'll be even better once you're back telling the stories and showing pictures in person. Take care and be safe. Love you and miss you, Jayna." And now Jayna's family was having to listen to a prosecutor seriously ask how they would feel about taking a plea deal in Jayna's murder. But Jayna's brother Hugh and his wife Kate were lawyers, and they would not be going quietly. They had been studying. They had already looked into Maryland law about inmate wages, the Son of Sam law, which prevented inmates from profiting off books or movies about their crimes. They had also made a flowchart about possible plea deals and their effects. And Jayna's family was absolutely convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, that Brittany Norwood had committed murder, and not only that, it was in the first degree. Premeditated murder. So they would go to trial. And because Brittany's team could not provide any type of evidence for her being insane, she would be tried as legally sane at the time of the murder. So Brittany's defense would claim this all came about because of an altercation. It hadn't been planned, and Brittany had simply lost control. After the jury had heard both sides, they would do an initial vote to see who would vote for first-degree murder. All 12 jurors raised their hands. So Brittany was cooked. When the jury would hand down their sentence, Brittany showed no emotion. Meanwhile, both families would cry. At Brittany's sentencing hearing, prosecution would explain this murder was not over a pair of yoga pants, like so many people in the media and online seem to say. I came across a lot of YouTube videos. The girl who murdered over a pair of yoga pants. That's not what this is about. It's very important that people realize that. Brittany's life was falling apart out from under her. She had been caught stealing, and this would cost her her dream job. This would also cause her to lose her current job. So she lured Jayna back to the store in the cover of night and brutally, senselessly murdered her. Brittany would apologize during the trial to Jayna's family and her family. She would verbalize remorse for her actions. But she spoke for less than 3 minutes, and she still made no admission of guilt. She provided no explanation for the horrific and senseless crime she committed. So I have a quote from Judge Greenberg, and it's intense. Judge Greenberg would say, quote, "I guess we'll never know, Miss Norwood, whether when you went back to that Lululemon store, you intended to kill Miss Murray. And to be candid with you, I'm not 100% sure that when you went back, that was your intention. But once you started your assault, you reveled in gore. What has struck me the most remarkable about this case, ma'am, especially in the light of the fact that I'm being told that you wanted a career as a physical trainer, is the incredible physical condition in which you found yourself on that day. To be able to rain down more than 300 blows with a variety of lethal instruments that I think were not immediately available to you is nothing short of astounding to me, ma'am. I confess to you, I once sat and just went like this." Here, Greenberg made a pounding motion. Then he said 300 times. It took me about 8 minutes to do that. With adrenaline coursing through your body, you mutilated this woman. And after every blow, you had a chance to think about what you were doing. The lies that you told afterward were incredible. You're one hell of a liar, ma'am. I watched your family during this trial, and I wanted to cry for them because they appear to be the personification of the American dream. You know, at some point, we who are parents, we send our children off into the world. I have 3 children I sent off into the world, and they're either off to college or they're off to the workplace. And all we can do is hope that we instilled in them the values that we had, that they be good citizens. But sometimes things go wrong. Terribly wrong. No parent should ever have to bury their child. Sometimes things happen. We lose a child to an accident, disease. And while, as parents, we may not accept that, at least we understand it. We understand why our loved one was taken away. But when a murder so horrific occurs, ma'am, there isn't any such acceptance. The information that I have, provided from your family and from your attorneys, expresses complete bewilderment. It's the sentence of this court that you be confined to the Maryland Division of Correction for the balance of your natural life without the possibility of parole. End quote. And Brittany again showed little reaction. She would become inmate number 401149 at Maryland's female-only prison, the Maryland Correctional Institute for Women. A violent, senseless murder of a coworker. An unspeakable loss for both the Murrays and the Norwoods. This family's also a victim in all of this. And an entire town left shaken. Exactly what happened on the night of Friday, March 11th, 2011 continues to be a mystery. A lot of people don't know. Did Brittany strike from behind as the two were walking through the store? Was it a face-to-face confrontation? The families continue to be left with questions. But to me, it seems that Brittany may have overheard Jayna on the phone outside of the store. She knew the jig was up, and she was about to not only lose her job, but her shot at becoming a personal trainer. And she was about to lose all this access to cash. People would learn the truth. They would learn Brittany was a liar and a thief. And therefore, Brittany lured Jayna back into the store under false pretenses, brutally attacked, and murdered her. After all, like Brittany's coach said, she hated losing more than she liked winning. And for the record, I don't blame anyone in this except for Brittany. But if you ever hear, "God help me, please help me," please call the police. On the 11th day of every month, Chastity Wilson, one of Jayna's close friends, organizes a get-together in Houston for people who knew Jayna. They share stories, they laugh, they honor her memory. Like I said earlier, Jayna was a badass. She was very well-rounded, intelligent, and it's incredibly tragic that her life was cut so short out of pure senselessness and selfishness. Jayna's brothers and some of Jayna's friends also started a nonprofit, the Jayna Murray Foundation, which awards scholarship money to students. It seems Jayna was an incredibly well-achieved, genuine, fun, and well-rounded person. She had so much life ahead of her. She didn't deserve a death like this, not in the slightest. I truly hope that her family and loved ones have been able to find peace. I also wish the same for Brittany Norwood's family and loved ones, who were also victims, and people who lost a friend, lost their sister, their daughter. I also recognize this was a fairly recent murder, so there could be loved ones listening to this now. And just know, if you are, I respect you and I hope that you're doing well. So that, everybody, is the perplexing and tragic murder of Jayna Murray, also known as the Lululemon Murder. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or send me a DM. If you would like to continue to follow the channel and support, I would love if you gave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you are listening on a podcast platform and you haven't done so yet, I would appreciate it very much if you left a 5-star review. Other ways to support the show are down in the show notes, including my link to my Patreon. Thank you again to Abby for requesting this story. If you have a topic request or a story of your own you'd like to share, you can email me at perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. I know this was a heavier one, guys, but we haven't done a true crime case in a while, and this one just really stuck with me. Reading Dan Morse's book, it's just incredibly shocking and crazy, the lengths that this woman went through to cover this up, and just this constant need to live this higher lifestyle and lie to get there. And like, her family is so hardworking, so dedicated. I truly don't understand how this was the result, you know? And Jayna being from a town very close by to where I grew up, her being so intelligent and driven and being so close to graduating, having so much life ahead of her. It's just so incredibly tragic. There's so many victims in this story, and I felt like it was important to talk about. I also think that it's interesting that this was a woman so senselessly and brutally murdering another woman. I feel like we don't talk about that much because it is typically men that do things like this. You don't really hear about murders like this with a female to this degree, especially with it being like, you know, not being like a poisoning or things like that. It's just like a very, very wild story. The police interrogation footage that I use as well, I did want to shout out the YouTube channel That Chapter, because they are the ones who put all of those clips in their YouTube videos. So that is where my clips are from and the audio that you guys are hearing if you're listening on the podcast episode. So that wraps up the story of the Lululemon murder. You all are amazing. I hope you have a great week. I hope you all stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Perplexity, a mystery podcast, hosted, written, and produced by Kadra Brannon. Assistant producer is TJ McCrae. If you enjoyed today's episode, tell the world about it by leaving a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really is the best way to support. Have a topic request or a perplexing story of your own you'd like to share? Send an email to perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support the show further and unlock exclusive bonus content, join the Perplexed Society at patreon.com/Perplexity Mystery Podcast. Perplexity merch and additional support links can be found in the episode description. Until next week, stay curious.